Good morning, everyone. If you've never met before, my name is Nate. I'm the student ministry pastor, and just really quickly wanted to say it is Servant Appreciation Month, and since I am standing up here, I have a great chance to just acknowledge if there's any student ministry leaders in here, how thankful I am for all of you guys, that there are many things that our ministry does, and it is not possible without other adults who care for teenagers, who want to encourage them and walk with them, who encourage me. So I'm really thankful for all of you guys if you're in here in this room. If you're not a leader yet, what you should do is come talk to me because I want you to be a leader. Because as a leader, not only do you get to pour into students' lives and walk with them, but you get to hopefully give them some sound advice. And one of the pieces of advice that I always like to give students is that I think that at all possible, people should be married young, all right? Now, young's a relative term, right? But I think that younger is better, honestly, because, I think that sometimes we just have this imaginary number that we've created in our minds that, like, well, you can get married at this age, as if for some reason that age is all of a sudden when maturity happens. That's not how that works. So I think that younger is just better, but also I am a little biased because I got married younger, relatively younger. I was 22 and Lauren was 21 when we got married. And so when we got married, Lauren still had a year left of school. And she was double majoring in math and teaching, going to school, and she also was on the soccer team there. So our first 6 months of marriage was super busy. But it was a lot of fun because Lauren was the starting goalkeeper, and their team ended up doing pretty good that first season. And they ended up making it to the NAIA Nationals, which is all out in Orange Beach, Alabama, top 16 teams. And so I wanted to go so bad, but we didn't have very much money. And so I knew I couldn't afford to go on the trip. But a friend of mine whose fiance was also on the team, and she was a senior, him and I were talking, and we were like, what if we drove? And so we did. We decided that we were going to drive. So we left Sunday night at 9 p.m., and we had to get there by Tuesday at 5 p.m. Now, here is the route that we took, right there. So we were up in Kirkland, Washington. We drove down to Orange Beach. As you can see, it was 42-ish hours. Now, if you did the math in here, 9 p.m. on Sunday, plus 42 hours is not 5 p.m. on Tuesday. It's 7 p.m. on Tuesday. But, we thought, oh, come on. Nobody really goes the speed limit, right? So we can make up the time as we go. We can make up 2 or 3 hours on the road. And so we did. We did this. We left, and I would sleep while he drove, and then I would drive while he slept. And we stopped here around Kearney, Nebraska, where my parents were living on the way. And we stopped half an hour, and I showered and ate soup, and then we traded, and then we got up on the road. Now, believe it or not, we made it to the game. There was a lightning delay. We made it by halftime. So here's me and my friend, and then there's me again and Lauren and her parents. Look how young we look, so full of life. And so it was great. It was awesome. We totally made it. But it was not without cost. See, we did cut some time by going a little fast, but we also got some speeding tickets. So I got one, and he got one in a totally different state on the way up. Well, we had made a pact right on the way. We're like, let's not tell the girls until we get home because it's really stressful, and, it was nationals, and they were both starting, and it was just, we didn't want to kind of make it more stressful, and we were surprising them. So, why sour the moment? Let's just not tell them. Well, he caved, okay? He totally caved, and he told her. His fiance, well, Lauren then asked me, did you get a speeding ticket? And I straight up lied to her face. I said no. It was for her, though. It was not to stress her out. It was all for her. So I was like, I stood strong. I was like, I'm going to tell her when we get home. And then we got home, and I was like, I kind of want a couple more days. I was a little nervous about it. So I put the ticket in our desk, and I put a couple papers on it. And I thought, in a couple days, this will be great. Well, I don't suggest this plan in any way, shape, or form because I forgot about it. I completely forgot about the ticket until the day we were moving out of the apartments into some other apartments, and I'm cleaning up the desk, and I pull off the papers, and all of a sudden there's this envelope, and I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, no. And so I opened it to figure out when it was due, and it was due that day. One problem with that is that we had paid first and last month's rent for the apartments we were moving into, and we had like $50 in our account. The ticket was not a $50 speeding ticket. And so I had to tell Lauren, and she was a little unhappy with me, all right, a little bit stressed. We made it work. We got the ticket paid. But nowadays, she can tease me about it, and she tells everybody that she can about that huge mistake that I made when we first got married and didn't tell her about something. And so, like, nowadays, it kind of brushes off our shoulder, and we laugh about this moment where we didn't have enough money to make us pay for a speeding ticket. But for many people, this would not be funny at all. Right? Like, this would not be a funny moment. They would not be able to laugh about this moment. This would be really stressful. Because for many people, finance plays a huge part in, like, conflict in marriages and relationships. Money is, like, one of the primary sources for conflict in many ways. And if you look up, like, even top reasons for divorce, finances consistently ends up on lists for one of the top reasons why people will get divorced. And it's just this type of thing where money has a hold on a lot of our lives, and the way that we use that wealth and possessions and the way that we like decide what value that's going to have in our life plays a big part. But this is not a new thing. This is not a brand new concept for us, this importance of money. The Bible talks about money all the time, and the importance of like not loving money and the importance of spending it wisely and all these things, and it has these outlines for proper uses of money. In fact, James has already talked about money. If we went back to James 2:6-7, he already has told them, he says, hey, you're playing favorites for people with status and wealth within the church, but you've dishonored the poor man. Well, is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do they not blaspheme the good name by which you have been called? So James has already started talking about these rich people in their communities who are dragging Christians into the streets, pulling them into courts. Sometimes even like these people were dying because of they were pulling them into courts. They were being sentenced to death. So James is like, why are you treating the people within the church body like that when it's those same type of people who are dragging you into court and doing these things? It just doesn't make sense, right, for James. Well, he's going to come back today to that type of concept. And so we're going to talk about wealth today in chapter 5, verses 1-6. But as we kind of jump into this, here's a question that I think we need to all ask ourselves is, am I placing an unhealthy value on wealth? When you really reflect on your own life, are you somebody who's placing an unhealthy value on wealth, possessions, money, things like that? Well, we're going to kind of discover and talk about that today. Let's start, though, chapter 5, verse 1. We're going to go all the way through verse 6 today. Come now, you rich people, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. All right, how many of you in this room want to be that rich person or that kind of rich people right there? Cool. Yep, we're good. Me either, okay? Seems terrible, right? Weep and howl. However, can I be just kind of clear off the get-go? When it comes to being a rich person, if you're sitting in this room and you're living in America, really good chances are that you are a rich person. You have plenty of money. The problem usually in America, even if you're like considered middle or lower tax bracket, you're probably not rich. In America, we don't have a money problem, we have a contentment problem. People just aren't content with the amount of money that they make. But for all intents and purposes, when it comes to the grand scheme of the world and the people James is writing to, you are a rich person. However, are you, when it comes to this verse, you might be a rich people, but are you the rich people that James is talking about? Probably not, but maybe. See, James has moved into, right, we've already gone through all the way through chapter 4, and now here in chapter 5, verses 1-6, he is prophesying, using prophetic language here. And so when he says to weep and howl, the Jewish believers who are reading this, that it would have clicked right away. They would have known exactly where James was going. Let's just take two examples. For example, Isaiah 13:6, wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Jeremiah 4:8, for this put on sackcloth, mourn and wail, for the fierce anger of the Lord has not turned away from us. So what James is doing now, he's starting to talk about judgment. He's saying, hey, you rich people, one day a judgment is coming. You need to mourn and wail. Now, are Christians going to experience judgment in the here and now on earth? Yeah. Yeah, they will. Read the book of Romans for an example of this. Like, Christians do experience judgment here on earth. However, will Christians experience judgment at the end times? No. We don't believe after the tribulation there's going to be a final judgment. Christians will not experience that judgment. That is not for Christians. And so James is not talking to Christians. Okay, he's talking to non-Christians in this context, people who will, in the end, at the end times, be judged. However, it would not be fair to go to the opposite extreme and say, oh, well, I'm a Christian, and this doesn't apply to me then. Because that's not what's happening, because James is writing this letter to Christians. Like, James isn't writing it thinking, oh, the rich people are going to find this letter and they're going to read it. That was probably not on his mind, right? He's still writing this letter to the churches. And so there's a purpose there that he's writing it to. Now, what we can see is that, like, just off the get-go, if we want to see a grand theme for 1 through 6 before we break into it more, is that James is warning everyone about the inevitable demise of all human wealth. This applies to both the Christian and the non-Christian. All wealth eventually will go away, right? There's something to it there, and so James is saying something that does apply to Christians. However, he is not talking necessarily to Christians about Christians in this moment. So let's go back to it. Come now, you rich people, weep and howl, right? Weep and wail for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion, which, by the way, this idea here, there's two different Greek words here for corroded versus corrosion, and this one can sometimes mean poison. The translation is perfectly fine, but the idea is going to be like, this thing that's going to corrode these things will serve as a testimony against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Now, first thing we want to see is how he uses these words have, right? So your riches have rotted, garments have become moth-eaten, your gold and silver have corroded. So I think most people recognize that when they die, they don't get to take anything with them. And everything that you have eventually is going to corrode. It's going to, like everyone kind of understands this general idea that eventually these things will all go away. Well, James isn't just saying that eventually your things will corrode, that your things will become moth-eaten, and that it will rot. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, actually, he declares it as your riches have rotted. They're already being rotted. In fact, they already did. So an example of this in English would be like in sports. If you're watching a sports game and sometimes the game gets out of hand and someone will declare, it's over. Game's over. One of the most popular basketball players in the NBA, Steph Curry, he's got his night-night celebration. That's what he calls it, which is like in the middle of a game, usually near the end. If he hits a three and he thinks the game's over, he'll say night-night, which is like, good night, you can go to bed. There's no worth watching anymore. Game's over, right? Now, it's not Little League where they've 10-runned them and they're like, all right, let's just call it early. That's not what's happening. In sport, you can declare the game's over, but that doesn't mean that the literal time of the game has ended. You're still in the middle of the game. It's just that you're so sure of the outcome that you can declare okay, game's over, night-night, we're done. No reason worth watching anymore. Well, this isn't very much in a similar way that James is saying all these things. He's saying that your riches have rotted, your garments have become moth-eaten, your gold and silver have corroded. It's already happened. He's so sure that these things are going to happen and that in some ways they already are because they really already have corroded, become moth-eaten, and all these things. These things have already been done. And sometimes we can be then tempted, right, as people who who have this idea of, oh, wealth is so important and we got to hoard all these things, that we think that whatever we do, we can, it's worth something, when in reality, James is these things are already useless. As you own them, they're already useless. And then he says, it is in the last days that you've stored up your treasure. Now, the word your is going to be important here, but this sounds very similar to something Jesus says. Matthew 6, 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy. That sounds pretty familiar to me, right? Your things will become moth-eaten. They're going to be corroded. This idea like rust destroying that thing. Where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This is the same idea, right? James is using these even similar words, right? And what's interesting, I think, about what Jesus says here is his implication is that everyone stores up something. Everyone has a treasure that they store up. You, if you're sitting in this room, you are included in this. Everyone stores up some sort of treasure. Now the question is, are you storing up treasure on earth, or are you storing up treasure in heaven? Well, let's look to verse 24. He kind of gives another clarifying statement here just a few verses later. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So what are these like earthly treasures? Wealth. Like he says it. Like, here, let me tell you what it's about. You can't serve God and wealth. You can't store up treasures on earth, wealth on earth, and store up treasures in heaven. That's not how that works. If you want to store up heavenly rewards and have all these treasures up there, then you're gonna use your wealth differently than people who store it up on the earth. See, if you choose to store up money, you are storing up earthly treasures, and they're useless and of no eternal value. They're already corroding. They're already moth-eaten. Like, this is something that James has been making clear, right? These things that you think that you have are useless. And we can look at other people's lives sometimes and be like, oh man, we can be envious. Like, God, I wish I had that. Oh God, why wouldn't you give me what they have? If I had all this money, think of all the good things I would do with it. Because that's the problem, God. I just need more money. Then I would be able to do some real good. And we can be envious of these people. And the truth is, James is like, there's nothing to be envious of because what they have is nothing. Like, we're envious of nothing. What they have is just like material worldly things. Those things are already corroded and moth-eaten. These things are useless. They're useful for here on the earth, but in true reality, they mean nothing. You're jealous over nothing. Your riches have rotted. Your garments have become moth-eaten. Hey, you rich people, the stuff that you like, it's already gone. Like, you might be holding it, you might have it here, the game might still be going, but it's already gone. The outcome is determined. They are going to go away, and it is in these last days that you have stored up your treasure, not heavenly treasure, your treasure. So first off, hoarding money is one big problem that James has been talking about. Right? There's people who are hoarding, these rich people, and they're hoarding their money. They're not being generous with it. When somebody comes and says, hey, I need a coat, they're not giving them a coat. They're not giving them anything. They're hoarding up money all for themselves. It's their money. They're going to keep it. So that's a problem. Then there's a second problem in James 5:4. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of armies. See, apparently there was rich people who were using their money and status and power, and they were cheating other people. Like, he's like, hey, just so you know, there's people, I know the rich people out here they're hiring people, they're bringing people in to do things for them, and they're cheating them. They're not paying them what's due them. And now here's what I know that some of us are thinking, because this is not a new problem. And what we want to think, because this is what we do, is we are probably thinking right now, yeah, down with the rich. They're all oppressors. If I made that much money, I would not use it the way that they're using it. I would use it differently. And the truth is, you probably wouldn't. You guys ever heard there's this statement that I love? I've heard tons of time. I've probably said it myself, honestly. And people will say it like it's no big deal. They'll say, I need to make a certain amount of money because I have to live a certain lifestyle that I've become comfortable with. You guys have heard this? I got to make this much money because I've become accustomed to a certain lifestyle and I'm really comfortable there. That is not a content statement at all. Basically what you're saying is, if I made less than this that I feel I'm comfortable with, if I made less than that, I would not be comfortable. I would be discontent. I'd be upset. Many Christians make that statement. Now, I got to use my money to keep myself right here because I just have been accustomed to this lifestyle. I remember when Laura and I first got married, we had no money. It didn't help when I got speeding tickets. And so like we would go to church, right? And we would say all the time, we would tithe more consistently if we just made this much more, right? And we had like this number in our mind. Well, then do you know what happened? We made that much money. And then do you know where the bar went? Right here. And then like it just kept going up, like because that's what we do, right? We're like, well, if I just had a little bit more, then finally I would live the exact lifestyle I'm living right now, and then I would just give more. But we don't actually do that, do we? We start to live this lifestyle, and then we still find ourselves like, well, if I just made more. And then we're naive enough to be like, well, if I made millions, of course I would then give it. Really, would you? Because I think we would all then become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. So before we get on our high horse here and we start to be like, yeah, the rich people, you would probably be that person. In fact, in many countries, you are that person already. So there's that, okay? However, I do want to be clear. There's people who we just get a lapse in judgment, right? Or like we kind of we do get accustomed to a certain lifestyle and we don't think about it. At one point, Lauren and I had to look back and be like, hey, didn't we say one time what if we made this much money, we would tithe it? And we had to like reflect and be like, oh, yes, we did. So there's that, right? There's just like that lapse in judgment. But there are, on a different sense, there are people who do it on purpose. See, there are people who are cheating the poor and helpless in our communities, and this should make us upset. Yes, you should recognize and self-reflect and be like, how could I be better? But there is no doubt people who are on a completely different spectrum where they are absolutely cheating people on purpose in our communities. In fact, one of the things I looked up was, I'm sure you guys are all aware that human trafficking is a really big thing all around the world, all around the U.S. Human trafficking is something that happens a lot closer than sometimes we like to think it does. Well, in January of 2022, the DHS put out an estimated annual profit for human trafficking at about $150 billion. Billion dollars. A good amount of that is children. And of that whole, about 20% is sex trafficking. Like when we look at something like that, that shouldn't just like make us sad. That is absolutely evil and disgusting. That is at a completely different level of playing. Those people aren't just like, oh, I didn't realize that I wasn't using my money wisely. Those people want wealth and they want everything that they can possibly get, and they're gonna cheat people in order to get it. And they do it on purpose, and they don't care. That is evil. That should make us upset. That is the kind of person that James is talking about. He's like, hey, there's people in your community who they are dragging you into the streets. They're bringing you into court, and they don't care that some of you are being put to death. They don't care at all. And sometimes what we could be tempted to do then is to be like, yeah, this makes me upset. And ultimately, where's God? Like, why is God letting this stuff happen? Like, why isn't he done something about this? Like, why are these people able to do what they want to do? And James starts to kind of get into really where he's going in verse 4 in that second part. What he says is that the outcry of those who did the harvesting, so those people who are being cheated, has reached the ears of the Lord of armies. Who is the Lord of armies? Let's go to Revelation 19. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many crowns. And he has a name written on him, which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. See, it is this Lord of armies that we want to recognize as we read through the absolute power of the statement. We can read it, and I think it's almost impossible for us to comprehend what is actually happening here. This same Lord of armies hears the cries of injustice. We can think that he doesn't hear it, that he doesn't know. Like, does God see what's happening here? He does. He hears it. He knows. He understands. He has not turned a blind eye to injustice. James 5-6 then says, you have lived for pleasure on the earth and lived luxuriously. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous person. He offers you no resistance. Now, I want us to just pause. Think of the imagery here. Like, if you were reading this back as a Jewish Christian, this would have been like, you would have totally understood this, but we don't often think this way. So picture you're just standing at a field, you got 5 cows, and the guy's like, pick a cow, they'll slaughter it, and you get the meat from it. Well, you're not going to pick the thin cow. You're going to pick the nice, fat, juicy, plump cow. You should at least. That's the cow you should pick. Now, the irony of the whole thing would be like if the farmer is feeding all the cows the same, but this fat one, he's like eating others' food. He's kind of pushing his way through, and he's stronger, and he's bigger now, and he's going to make himself known. And he's going to take all this stuff from the other cows, and he is going to feel like he's living a really good life as a cow. Life is good, I'm fat, and I'm happy, and I'm eating all the food I want, and things are great, when he has no clue. What he is actually doing is fattening himself for slaughter. That's in many ways what James is saying. He's saying there's people here who they're living in luxury. They're living on this earth, and they're fattening themselves. They're saying, look, my life is so good. I've got all this money, and I'm manipulating and cheating people, and I'm dragging them into court, but whatever, because life is good. I got money. I got status. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to have a good life here. And what James is saying, he's like, they have no idea that they are actually fattening themselves for the day of slaughter, which is more end times language, by the way. See, some live to satisfy themselves, not knowing that it's leading to their own demise. They think that what they're doing has no consequences, and we can think that too sometimes. Like, we can look at these people's lives and we can begin to ask the question, and we can even be tempted sometimes to take God completely out of the equation and do everything all on our own. We're like, oh, yeah, well, God, like, okay, I guess God, but we have to do it all. We got to figure everything out, and we got to make this work. And we can start to distance ourselves, and we can start to push God out of the picture. We can get mad at God. We can get upset, when the true reality is they will be judged. These people who think they are winning have lost. It might appear like things are good for them, but it's not. They are just fattening themselves for the day of slaughter. Their choices and their decisions are not going to go unpunished. It says in 6, you have condemned and put to death the righteous person. He offers you no resistance. These Christians weren't doing anything to deserve it. These people, these rich people, these people like this were doing it just because they could. Just to make themselves happy, just to get whatever they could. And they thought they were going to get away with it. And they're not. Now the question then we got to finish with is, why would James write this section, and what are we supposed to do with it? Because what we can't do, right, is we can't read James 5, 1 through 6 and be like, well, I'm a Christian, and so this doesn't apply to me at all. That's not the point. But also, it is kind of confusing because James is writing to Christians, and then, like, all of a sudden, in this one section, he's like, but hold on, I'm going to talk to non-Christians for a second, even though they're never going to read it, and it's just kind of like, so what's the point? Well, to get the point of why James writes this, we do have to kind of get into verse 7 here really quickly, just the first half. James says, therefore, which if you see a therefore, you got to ask what it's there for. Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the coming of the Lord. James is saying, hey, I see what's happening to you. God sees what's happening to you. I know that people are separating you from your families. I know that people are separating you from your homes and your livelihood, and you're living with absolutely nothing. I know that people are dragging you into courts, and they're sentencing people to death. I know that life is hard. I see this, and God sees this. Therefore, just be patient. Because one day, the Lord will come, and he will judge. They have not won. So first off, Christians, be patient in suffering because God is a God of justice. We do live in a place right now, in a world where these kinds of people, they didn't just disappear. It still happens. But instead of being discouraged and being upset and saying, God, where are you? We need to remember to be patient and that God will enact judgment because God is a God of justice. Now, that being said, Christians, we are not off the hook for the general principles of James 5, 1 through 6. Are there Christians who are hoarding their money and storing up treasures on earth? Yes. Are there Christians who are living luxuriously? Absolutely. Are there Christians who are cheating other people? Unfortunately, yes. Those things still happen. Remember in James 4:13? So James writes, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. You know, that's a rich person statement. Only rich people can say something like that. It's fitting that this was spring break week because you know what many people did? It's not an evil thing, but you know what many people did? They went to such and such a city and they spent a certain amount of time there. Rich people can plan like that. Lauren and I can say, oh, in July we want to take this vacation for this long and this is our plan. That's a rich person thing. Do you think the people in James's time, these Christians, that they had any idea what was even happening the next day? Most of them, no. They didn't even know if they'd have their family the next morning. They had absolutely no clue what was going to happen the next day. This is a rich person problem. James has already talked about this in many ways, right? He's like, hey, there are people who are rich. There's some of you who are spending your life in such a way where you have enough arrogance to say, well, I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to spend a year there and I'm going to make a profit. Well, that's a problem that rich people have. Paul's written about this in 1 Timothy 6:10. He writes, for the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from this great faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Paul's writing to Christians. Do Christians struggle with money? Yeah, absolutely we do. But the love of money, not money itself, the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. See, some of us, we might think and we might might want to kind of give ourselves a pass here because we're like, well, I don't struggle with this. I don't hoard my money. I don't live luxuriously. But the truth is, we just kind of call it by something that sounds better. Instead of hoarding our money, we say that we're putting it in savings. We have financial stability, like, oh, we're just saving this for financial stability. It's a vacation fund. It's my budget. It's all these things. Now, before you call the Dave Ramsey podcast on me and say your youth pastor said budgeting is wrong, just hold off. That's not what I said. However, there's no doubt that there are absolutely Christians who are like, we're excusing ourselves because we're like, well, I'm just being financially wise. Maybe you are. But the question we need to ask is, are you generous with your wealth? This is what God calls us to, by the way. He calls us to be generous with our wealth. I know we have like numbers in our mind. It's good to have a metric. But God says to be generous with what you have. See, I'm somebody who, I'll confess I've been to McDonald's more times than I would like to say. I couldn't even count, honestly. And every time you go to McDonald's, they ask you, after your order, they ask you this question, like, do you want to round up for the Ronald McDonald charity? And I never once did that in my life. I was like, no, why would I do that? Well, then Judah got diagnosed with cancer, and so the last year and a half, we spent lots of time at the hospital, and this is in Chicago, but like, there's a room there in the hospital, and they've got coffee, and they've got snacks, and they've got all these things. And I can tell you, staying days and nights in the hospital, that room is amazing. We'll go in there, and we'll grab coffee, and it's just nice to get away, and you can relax. Or like if you have guests, they can come and hang out in there, because it gets stuffy in the hospital rooms. And so now, every time I go to McDonald's, they ask me still, do you want to round up for the Ronald McDonald charity? And I say yes. Now, before you dub me the next Mother Teresa, I want you to know that the max I will ever give on any given time is 99 cents. Usually it's like 30 cents. Also, if I'm being real, the reason I'm going there is because I want a burger and the best fries fast food has to offer. And then I'm like, well, I'm already there. I guess I might as well. Because I'm thankful for what they've done, at least for us. So like I give towards that, but it's just kind of like I'm already there. Like I'm not going out of my way to do this. And the honest truth is there are a lot of us in church world where that's the kind of givers we are. We just kind of take whatever we have left, right? We're like, okay, I got my money now. 401k, savings, vacation, new truck, house. I mean, like, I gotta save up for the sports team because my kid's gonna go pro, and then I gotta pay for all the music equipment, and we got all these things, right? None of these things are evil things, but we start there, and then we're like, okay, what's left? Okay, God, you can have that. Some of that, because I might need the rest of it for something else unexpected. This is what we do. Are we generous with our wealth, or are we round up our change givers? This is what most of us end up falling into if we're not careful. Is we just give God the leftovers, when the truth is God deserves our first fruits. When you get paid, you give God your first fruits. You give him something first, and you be generous, by the way, is what God calls you to do. And then you give that first. What you give to people, you're there to be generous. And then with whatever's left, you recognize that God will provide for your needs. God doesn't promise to provide for your wants, but he does promise to provide for your needs, your actual needs, not the needs that you think are your needs because they're your wants. But do we trust God enough to give to him? Or do we hoard it because we want control? Are we afraid that if I give God this, what's going to happen to me? Are we generous? Or do we just round up our change? See, we are in this moment, there are people who are manipulating and cheating, and we need to wait patiently. However, while we wait, God still calls us to be generous with our wealth and give him the first fruits. You do still have to be generous. You have to give. You have to, when somebody comes and they're like, hey, I need a coat. You don't just say, I'll pray for you. You give them a coat. Like, we want to be people who that's something that we can do because we're giving God first and we're figuring out whatever else we have left, God's got us. The last thing I want to say, I asked this, right, to kind of sum this up. Why would James write this section, and what are we supposed to do with it? Well, James wrote this because he wants us to know that God will enact judgment on the unjust. He will. He wanted the people who read his letters to know this, that one day God will enact judgment. He will. So be patient then. Because during that time, then, what are we supposed to do with it? You're supposed to wait patiently and be generous with what God gives you. You read James 5:1-6, and you say, how can I be a generous giver? Does my life reflect these rich people, and what do I have to do to change that? Wait patiently and be generous with what God gives you. Let me pray for us. God, thank you that you are a God who is generous. That you are a God who gives good gifts. God, forgive us, though, for the times where we have, in our own pride or arrogance, declared that the stuff that we have is ours, that we somehow earned it and we deserve it. God, remind us that you are the God who gives and takes away, that all we have is yours. God, I pray you point out those places in our lives where we have been stingy, where we haven't been generous, where we have been hoarding our money. And God, I'd ask that we would be generous people, that when people looked at our church and our lives, they would say, wow, there's something amazing happening there. Thank you, God, for Jesus, your love and your grace. In your son's name, amen. All right, everyone, have a great Sunday.